Lovers of freedom, seekers of truth, hello, and welcome to Journey of the Unshackled Mind on the Voluntary Virtues Network. My name is Caleb Bader. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the importance of studying history. When I was a kid in school, I was taught that the most important thing about studying history is that we can avoid making the same mistakes people have made in the past. I don't remember who told me this, but it was a very wise sentiment that has stuck with me ever since. Most likely, this piece of wisdom came from my mom, who instilled in me a deep love of learning and has nurtured that love ever since. I probably have a different relationship with my mom than the average person. She's one of the coolest and most interesting people I know, and I have a deep respect for her. She passed down to me an intense love of learning, reading, and gaining wisdom, and has been a wonderful teacher to me over the years. She's the one who taught me how to analyze information in a logical way and to seek the truth in life. There are some who don't understand the relevance of history and its importance on our lives today. But even of those who recognize that history is important, there's not many who find it important enough to dedicate much time and thought to. I can hardly blame them though. They have other things to do, other things to learn about. These are people who have families to provide for and spend valuable time with. They have businesses to run, careers to grow in, people to meet, places to see, dreams to pursue. On the surface, history has no relevance in these facets of life. These are people living in the present and working for the future. Why would the unchangeable past be such a vital thing to know about? It's an important thing to the average person because we base entire beliefs on our understanding of history. This happens subtly, and I don't think most people even realize that it's happening. But it is the major underlying support of statist ideology in particular. As Murray Rothbard points out in Anatomy of the State, quote, "In order to continue in office, any government, not simply a democratic government, must have the support of the majority of its subjects. This support, it must be noted, need not be active enthusiasm. It may well be passive resignation, as if to an inevitable law of nature. But support, in the sense of acceptance of some sort, it must be. Else the minority of state rulers would eventually be outweighed by the active resistance of the majority of the public." End quote. It's this passive resignation that seems to be the most prevalent in our day and time. As I discussed in last week's episode, most people are not knowledgeable about the history and function of the state power. They just accept the state as an inevitable fact of human existence, and they try to live good lives despite its presence. Each time a person is hurt by the state, however, or each time a person even observes another person being wronged by the state, their faith in statist ideology is weakened. Therefore, when a person sees evil acts being carried out by the state, it becomes necessary for statist demagogues to convince them that they are necessary evils. Yes, the cops extort money from you for ridiculous infractions of arbitrary laws, but they also protect the weak and the innocent from violent criminals. Yes, a large percentage of the yield of your labor will be taken by the state each year. But in return, the state will give you roads and schools and hospitals. which of course could never exist without the state. Yes, the state involves itself in unnecessary and evil wars of greed. But it is vital that we have a strong national defense to protect us from foreign invaders. It goes on, and the excuses become endless. Albert J. Nock does a wonderful job of highlighting this phenomena in his essay, Anarchist Progress, which can be found in a collection of his essays titled On Doing the Right Thing. These are available for free at www.mises.org, MISES.org. A couple weeks ago, I was having a conversation with my grandpa, and he told me about how horrible and high-priced telephone service used to be before they came in and busted up the AT&T monopoly. I knew that they was the federal government, and therefore I was naturally suspicious of what he was telling me. I'm still learning, but I know enough to realize that monopolies really don't exist without state intervention, and that any time the state is made out to be the hero, you can pretty much assume the opposite. The thing that made this conversation with my grandfather so notable is he's not a big government guy. He's a man's man, a free-thinking individual, a small business owner. I work for him, and I hear him say something against the state at least twice a week. I've never seen him involved with politics or heard him endorse a politician. He talks about the jerk cops and the DOT boys, the stupid city planners and the inspectors and the ridiculous bureaucracy, and on and on. Point being, he's hardly what I would call a statist. But even a man like him can be tricked into thinking that the state has done something worthwhile. There's something like the history of telecommunication doesn't appear on the surface to be vital. It might seem interesting to people with nerd tendencies like me, but to most people, it probably just seems like boring waste of brain space. Yet, in this one particular case, a lack of knowledge of the history of telecommunications, mixed with state propaganda, led to an otherwise rational and reasonable man being misled. At the time this conversation took place, I was completely uneducated about the history of AT&T, and the particular trust-busting case in particular my grandpa was referring to. I knew nothing about it. I knew enough to know that monopolies as we know them do not occur naturally without the state. And I knew that any kind of state intervention in the market is a bad thing. But I didn't know anything about the history of this case, so I kept my mouth shut. But it had invoked in me a desire to understand what really happened. Over the next couple weeks, I researched the history of telecommunications. I started by going back to Mises.org and listening to all the available lectures on antitrust by Walter Block, Murray Rothbard, and Tom DiLorenzo. I was almost certain that at one point I had heard AT&T come up in one of those lectures, and sure enough it did. But only in a passing comment, so with a refreshed knowledge of the history of antitrust laws, I proceeded onward to look at other sources of information. I read dozens of articles about the history of AT&T and the Bell system, and I started to piece together information to see a clearer picture of the true story. When I was a kid in school, I was taught about the great genius Alexander Graham Bell and his invention, the telephone. The way this history was taught to me was as if Mr. Bell had been solely responsible for this great technology. And without his great mind, we would still be living in an age of telegraphs and smoke signals. But as I know now, that's not really how inventions and innovations work. It's never the case that one person has a brilliant idea and brings a perfected product or technology to the market. Innovation comes about by thousands of minds working off of similar ideas. Really, the telephone was an innovation of the telegraph technology that already existed. And before the telegraph, people were experimenting with the same concepts by linking tin cups to each other with a tight wire. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that Alexander Graham Bell was a smart man. But what I didn't learn in school is that while he was working on the technology of the telephone, there were lots of other people working on the same thing at the same time. In fact, there was another prominent inventor at the time named Elisha Gray, also working on telephone technology, who is said to have shown up at the patent office on the same day as Mr. Bell, but only a couple hours late. The details of this particular controversy between Mr. Bell and Mr. Gray are debatable. But what is not debatable is that after acquiring a patent from the state, Mr. Bell had an unnatural monopoly over telephone technology. This artificial monopoly by state intervention lasted from March 7th, 1876, when the original patent was filed by Mr. Bell, until 1894 when it expired. During this time, Bell held over 900 patents and had filed over 600 patent infringement suits against market competitors. Needless to say, after the expiration of most of Bell's original patents in 1894, there was a boom of competition and growth in the telecommunications industry. The industry had many years of prosperity and development. But then a man named Theodore Vail became president of AT&T in 1907 and went to work trying to eliminate competition through government regulation. As usual, the big business guys and the big government guys were conspiring together against the free market. Nationalization would serve their interest in eliminating competition. But as usual, they needed some sort of excuse. And as usual, crisis always makes the best excuse for the state. That horrific catastrophe known as World War I became their convenient excuse. And on August 1st of 1918, the federal government nationalized the entire telecommunications industry. Of course, the great benevolent government did this for national security reasons. During this time, the industry became heavily regulated, and these regulations would be used to fight competition even after the industry was privatized again after the war. Rate regulation continued after privatization, and AT&T continued using it to their advantage, as well as the government officials in their pocket. The regulatory commissions continued expanding along with their regulations of the market, choking out AT&T's competition. All this government intervention continued building until 1934, when the Communications Act was passed and the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, was established. The FCC could regulate rates, restrict entry into the industry, and set up a licensing process, all on the grounds of preventing wasteful duplication and unnecessary competition. The big business guys and the big government guys kept playing this crony capitalism game over the next 5 decades, with new regulations, court cases, and mergers happening along the way. Then in the late 70s, an antitrust suit was started against AT&T. This is the suit that my grandfather was referring to that led to the eventual breakup of the Bell system. In 1974, when the case was started, AT&T was the sole provider of telephone service throughout most of the United States, and most telephone equipment was produced by its subsidiary, Western Electric. During this 10-year period from the start of the antitrust case in 1974 to the final agreement became effective in 1984, the U.S. Department of Justice built its case, and AT&T came up with an offer to negotiate. AT&T proposed an alternative solution where it would keep its control of Western Electric, Yellow Pages, the Bell trademark, Bell Labs, and AT&T Long Distance, but it would give up ownership of its local companies. AT&T broke its member companies up into 7 independent regional Bell operating companies. On the surface, this could seem to the average person like the wise and all-knowing state was breaking up a dangerous monopoly to save the public from outrageous costs. But when we look at what really happened, we can clearly see that the state's intervention in the market is the root cause of the calamity from the very beginning. At the time, in 1984, it must have seemed like a big deal for the giant controller of the telephone industry to be broken up. But it's really not a big deal, because this is crony capitalism we're talking about. By the early 2000s, 4 of those 7 baby Bells, Ameritech, Bell South, Pacific Telesis, and Southwestern Bell, were owned by AT&T again. Verizon bought 2 of the remaining 3, Bell Atlantic and NYNEX, and now, most recently, AT&T has bought $1.9 billion worth of Verizon. So really, when we take a closer look at history, we can see how the state has afflicted the telecommunications market with over 100 years of intervention. The state caused the problem and then stepped in to look like the big hero fixing the problem, but never really fixed the problem at all, in fact. So, if you don't know history, then how do you know the state is lying to you when they say, we saved you from the bad guy? That these evils are necessary evils, like we were talking about before. How do you know? You don't know. If you don't know history, it's easy to fall for the trick. It's easy to be fooled, to be duped. This is the importance of history. I mean, there is more factors of importance of history. There's more reasons why history is important. But this one that I'm addressing today is one of the most vital things in understanding why we study history. And this is only one case, one example of this. This comes up all the time in our day-to-day lives. We come across these arguments every day. Now, this is why people think World War II pulled us out of the Great Depression, because they don't know their history. So they're willing to accept the lie that this war, this destructive act, pulled us out of an economic depression that it's really ridiculous. But people believe it because they don't study history. And that's the lie they're told. So they accept the false truth that they're given, that they're taught in school. Hey, this is the truth. You know, the state saved you from the robber barons. The state saved you from the Nazis. The state saves you from dangerous monopolies that control the market. But when you look at history, when you look at economics, when you really study those things and learn those things, you can see that, no, that dangerous monopolies come about by the state. And wars, there's no possible way that a war can help an economic depression. There's no way that a war can be beneficial. Even looking at it purely from a financial standpoint. Not even thinking about the bodies, just thinking about the dollars. There will always be a select few that will benefit from it. Study history. It's important. Learn it. So you know when these conversations come up. Even if you don't know the specific case, you'll know enough of history to know that, hey, something sounds fishy about that. Because it might seem minor, it might not seem important. Especially a topic like this, especially a telephone history. But when it comes down to it, it really is. Because we base our beliefs off of our knowledge of history that we've been taught. With all that being said, I think I'm nearing the end of my segment. I do want to refer you to a couple articles that I found very helpful when I was researching this topic. I read a lot of articles, but the ones that helped me out the most, the ones I enjoyed reading the most, was one by Adam D. Thierer. I'm probably mispronouncing that name, so I'll spell it. It's Thierer. It's called Unnatural Monopoly: Critical Moments in the Development of the Bell System Monopoly. And that can be found at cato.org. Again, that was Adam D. Thierer, Thierer. And it was titled Unnatural Monopoly: Critical Moments in the Development of the Bell System Monopoly. The next article I found helpful was by Thomas J. DiLorenzo, and it is The Myth of Natural Monopoly, and that can be found on Mises.org. It's interesting to me when considering innovation and how innovation works in the market. Like I was discussing earlier, it's not just one person has a brilliant idea and then there's this perfected product or this perfected technology that just appears in the market because of their brilliant idea. They'll have an idea, and then people, hundreds of people or thousands of people over generations will continue to improve on that idea or that concept or that observance of nature. And we see that market innovation happens that way. Well, state innovation happens in a very similar way. We look at ancient states, and a lot of times an ancient state would be driven by force. The state is still force today, but it's heavily reliant on the ideology, on people going along with the ideology, accepting the ideology. It's very intricate and it's very confusing, and we have all these legislative processes, and we have a Congress, and we have a Senate, and we have all these things. People don't even understand how it works. There's a lot of people that don't understand how the American government works, or how any government works. How monopolies work, or how the market works. But if you're passionate about knowing the truth, if you really care about freedom, then you'll study history. You'll learn. It'll be exciting for you. It'll be fascinating for you as you grow in your understanding of the way the world works, the way things are around us, and why they are the way they are, and how we can keep them the same, or change them, or not make the same mistakes as those in the past. And you'll be able to educate people. You'll be able to share that knowledge with them when they make excuses for the state, saying that the state's evils are a necessary evil. Because I'm telling you right now, there is never such a thing as a necessary evil. Necessary evil does not exist. There's evil and there's good. And you have a choice. Whether you partake in evil or you partake in good. And I'm here today to encourage you to partake in good, to eschew the evil, to stay away from the evil, to separate yourself from the evil as much as possible. And I know we live in an evil world. You can never separate yourself entirely. In this age that we live in, you're stuck with the evil. But you don't have to participate. You don't have to enthusiastically promote it. You don't have to put out a yard sign that says, "Vote for evil." And I believe I'll close with that. I hope you have a wonderful week and that you keep seeking the truth on your journey.